I stood among 30 soldiers on the Anqi airport concourse. Sweat dripped down my cheeks and stained my camouflage uniform. We watched the airplanes moving around the airport and tried to determine which one we would fly to Saigon. A silver C-123 transport pulled into the center of the field and shut down its engines. An army caribou, taxiing behind, jammed one brake and reversed, showering us with a jet of hot air. It was our plane. The rear hatch of the silver C-123 popped open. 4 men stepped out and headed toward us. The rear hatch of the caribou opened. The flight mechanic walked down the ramp, eyeing us suspiciously like restless tomboys. Through the fuselage I could see the pilots sitting in the cockpit. One of them noticed my wingtips and nodded. The men from the silver plane came close enough for us to recognize them as High Command 1 from the Army, 3 from the Navy. The flight mechanic opened his mouth to command us to climb aboard. The pilot waved him on. He unfolded his clipboard, authorizing the landing. The commanders were approaching quickly. In front walked a very tall, large man with stars on his epaulettes and a bandaged arm. I tensely thought, who is tall with stars, riding silver airplanes, and wearing a bandaged arm? "Isn't that Westmoreland by any chance?" asked the private behind me. That's right. Westmoreland, commander of all forces in Vietnam, was only 100 feet away and heading in our direction. I looked around for a lieutenant or captain who should have taken command of the crowd, yelled halt, and done all the nonsense one should do when a fucking general shows up. My search revealed that I was the most senior man in the crowd. "Attention," I shouted loudly. The duffel bags and laundry sacks collapsed into the dirt as the crowd let go of their hands to stand at attention in front of the general. He had to be pleased with that. When I turned around, Westmoreland was just around the corner, marching with a smile and trying to make eye contact with the skinny warrant officer who had just given the perfect military salute. I kept my hand at my visor until he stopped and saluted back. The general and his admiral buddies were standing directly across from me and the 30 grunts. "At ease, Mr. Mason." He was close enough to see my name on the patch, so close that he seemed much taller than he really was. A guy like that should be a general. He had no other choice. "Mr. Mason," he addressed me confidentially. "My friends and I are here on important business, but my plane just broke down." "His plane?" "He owns all the planes here. So are the helicopters. So are the ships. Westmoreland owned everything, even the cannon fodder he's addressing now." "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir." "Thank you. Mr. Mason, if you don't mind, I'd like to borrow your plane so I can get these distinguished gentlemen to the ships in time." The admiral smiled upon hearing the "if you don't mind" joke. "I don't mind, sir. Of course, absolutely, my airplane is your airplane is your airplane." "Thank you, Mr. Mason." His square jaw stretched into a smile, and the light of understanding flashed in his eyes. "May I ask you to move your squad to the side so we can get on the road as soon as possible?" "Yes, sir." "D'accord." I turned around and ordered the soldiers out. They frantically grabbed their gear and scurried away. The admirals went inside the plane and took 3 seats out of 35. Westmoreland turned to me and said, "Thank you again, Mr. Mason. I hope you won't be too late. ... Where were you headed?" "On vacation, sir." "Oh, vacation. There's another plane coming in soon." Time magazine's Man of the Year went inside and joined the admirals. 4 men sat in the huge bay of the Caribou. The flight mechanic, who looked like he had just been promoted by at least 2 ranks, pressed the ramp button and sealed the plane. We were showered with streams of air from the propellers, and the plane flew away, first turning into a dot and then dissolving into the sky. The dusty crowd came to life. I hope they're not crowded in there. You can't put the rank and file and the bigwigs next to each other, you know." "Why the fuck not? Our soot makes them lose their luster." I was sitting in an airliner that was gently floating through the air toward Taiwan, and I felt really lucky. My sweat had long since evaporated in the air-conditioned cabin air, and I was slowly enjoying the drink the flight attendant had brought. I stared out at the sea through the porthole and thought about the fact that at this very moment Resler and the rest of the gang were trying to clean the mountains of rat shit and mold out of our tent. How can you not smile at that? We had just gotten back from Bong Sun a couple days ago. The Viet Cong had either suddenly surrendered or evaporated. After 41 days of non-stop fighting in the Bong Sun Valley, it was announced that the enemy had suffered heavy losses. Victory is ours. It's time to go home. But we couldn't just fly away quietly. After all, we had been there for 41 days. We wanted to leave nicely. After all, we were first squadron. 100 Hueys lined up over An Key Pass and snaked across the sky, trying to come in for a spiral landing in the Gulf area. The guys on the ground later informed us that we looked extremely impressive. They couldn't hear our comms conversations. Everyone was yelling that it wasn't a formation, but crap, that we were flying in one bunch. The pilots were nervous and worried about how we would look in front of the entire cavalry. 100 helicopters landed, causing a storm in the Gulf area. The crews marched to their tents. The rats had the upper hand again. Piles of their shit gave the feeling of a cozy mess that only a homeowner could make. Mold covered absolutely everything. Black shadows with shiny eyes scuttled around the corners as we entered. It's time to get rid of those fucking rats, Connors yelled. I was sitting there smiling stupidly when the stewardess asked, "Would you like another drink, sir?" Him? Oh, yes. An indignant Connors always amused me. Once, back from a bender, he was explaining that the tent canopy should be down, not up. Then he sat down in the dark on his bunk and began to loudly recite all the inconveniences of having the tent canopy up. Then he pulled the rope that lowered the canopy beside him. The canopy had had time to fill with water during the day, so when it rolled up, several gallons of water rained down on Connor's head and drenched his bunk. He unleashed a torrent of curses, bursting with rage and fury. He also loaned me $100 for a vacation. The day before, when I was about to go on a combat mission, Connor said, "Mason, be careful, very careful, okay?" "I'm always careful." "Yeah, but right now you're worth $100 to me." By the time we got to Taipei, I was in high spirits. Wise Uncle Sam had taken complete care of his warriors. Everything had been worked out for us. In Saigon, we were assigned to different cities: Taipei, Bangkok, Sydney, and others. The entertainment in each city was the same: drink and fuck. Or fuck and get drunk, depending on your morals. We got off the plane and a smiling government employee took us to the bus. The bus raced through the streets, while the man fluently listed local hotels, listing price and location. I decided to stay at the King's. When the civil servant dropped us off at the hotel, the Chinese civilian part of the group got right down to business. A pleasant and savvy Chinese man, the organizer of our social life in the city, clung to us right outside the bus. "Okay, guys, you've come to the right place," he smiled warmly. "Let's go this way. I'll help you check into your rooms, but we have to hurry. Taipei's got tons of fun things to do." I threw my bag into the room. Across from me was a man named Chuck. Chuck was in his 40s, a captain in the war. He came out of the room in almost the same tourist outfit as me: slacks, plaid shirt, loafers. We barely had time to introduce ourselves to each other before Danny, our guide, flew up to us. Come, gentlemen, we must hurry. Taipei has tons of fun things to do." Danny chased us down the corridor to the escalator. "Remember, gentlemen, you came here to enjoy yourselves, and I'm here to help you. First, we'll cross the street and stop at a great upscale bar for a drink and to discuss plans. You tell me what you want to do and I'll be your guide." Danny was walking a little ahead and almost pacing as he turned to us. He was so excited, you could easily think he too had snuck out on vacation from Vietnam. Danny led us into a bar. I noticed 30 or 40 girls sitting along one wall, one behind the other. He scooped Chuck and me up and shoved us to the front of the line. "Martha, it's so good to have you here," he said to the first girl. She nodded warmly, first to Danny, then to us. "Hi," I began. My name is Bob Mason. Martha's whole demeanour showed that she was pleased to see me. We moved along the long line of girls, saying hello to almost every one of them. When the girls were done, we went up to the second floor and sat down at a table where one of Danny's friends instantly began pouring us drinks. So, gentlemen, which one do you want? You mean which one of those girls? I clarified. Sure. Tell me which one you like, and she'll be with you like this, he snapped his fingers. Well, I saw one in there, but I didn't remember her name, I explained. Where does she sit? I think she was the 10th one. In a purple dress. Yeah, Sharon. You have excellent taste, Bob. Thank you. Chuck described the girl he remembered, and Danny left the table. Be right back, gentlemen. Drink up. No sooner had Danny run down the stairs than I saw the girl in the purple dress, Sharon, walking with another man to a table at the opposite end of the room. She sat down opposite her beau, facing me. I felt cheated, even though I didn't know her at all. Of all the girls in line, she was the only one who looked me straight in the eye. As I sat there watching her, I realized that I loved her with all my heart. She reminded me of someone. She was smiling softly at her beau, but her expression changed slightly when she looked up. She didn't take her eyes away, and I realized that she loved me too. Danny returned, leading the two girls in front of him. Both in beautiful dresses with evening bags in their hands, they sat down across from Chuck and me, and Danny introduced us to each other. Linda, this is Bob. Vicky, this is Chuck. He stood for a moment longer, grinning at the happy couples. I'll go see what's up with the drinks. As he walked away, he leaned over to me and whispered. Sharon was all ready. I nodded quickly. Linda leaned across the table to me and whispered, I'm sorry you didn't get the one you loved. If you want, I can leave. Yeah, I wanted to. That girl, Sharon, seemed like an oriental copy of Patience. Patience looked at me the same way when we first met, but I hadn't had enough whiskey to get stale yet. Linda's willingness to walk away and be rejected awakened the remnants of sentimentality in me, and I responded. No, of course not. She's prettier than I am, Linda said, looking for a compliment. Truth be told, Sharon was prettier, but I reminded myself that none of them would mess with me if I wasn't paying for it. In 4 days it would be over. Don't be silly, you're prettier than she is. Thanks, it's my pleasure, she smiled. Sharon continued to glance at me occasionally. I couldn't figure out why. I had very vague memories of the interiors of the many clubs, the chants in the streets, the bright night lights and cab rides. I even woke up in a different hotel. My companion for $10 a day was Linda. She quenched my desperate passion, occasionally diverting herself to show me around the island. We never visited the same place twice, dining at different clubs and restaurants each night. Occasionally, while walking around the island, I would catch Sharon's familiar gaze. The 4 days flew by like a blink of an eye. Strangely enough, when we arrived at the airport, we were met by a crowd of girls near the bus. As soon as we stepped outside, the departing soldiers were reunited with their Chinese girlfriends. The girls were weeping profusely. What is that supposed to mean? 5 days ago they were complete strangers, and now they were tearfully waving goodbye to us. I jumped off the bus, but Linda was nowhere to be found. I snuck past the hugging couples and headed down the roped-off path to the terminal. At the door, I heard someone calling my name. I looked up and saw Sharon. She was smiling broadly, but tears were streaming down her cheeks. She held out her arms to me, and I instinctively hugged her. I couldn't understand why she was doing this. Be careful, please, she said. A near hysterical feeling swept over me as I stepped out into an quay. Fear overwhelmed from within, replaced by a restless dread, chilling even in this humid heat. I shook myself weakly and pushed the demons as far away from me as possible, fishing out the field phone. In the dark tent, while I was being connected to the company, I was shaken for real. Welcome back, Mr. Mason Sergeant Bailey said. I was instantly relieved to hear his voice. We'll send a jeep to pick you up. The weather was grey, cloudy, humid, and incredibly hot. I lit another Pall Mall and waited. In a matter of days, I had successfully suppressed my fear, almost entirely. In the mountains, where the cavalry were now operating, we were fired upon very rarely. The most combative situation occurred when one of the attack helicopters hit our slick. Major Astor, who had replaced Captain Morris, was a tall, sturdily built man with short blonde hair. He looked more like a stereotypical Marine than a military pilot. The Major joined us just after Bong Sun Valley. He had caught only unstrenuous, boring sorties into the local jungle and drew erroneous conclusions from it. They give us almost complete freedom of movement. Major Astor started a conversation with John Hall. How do they even hold on if we control the air? We don't control anything, but they do, John replied. Yeah, I've seen those thugs. Look, they don't stand a chance against our choppers. Astor grinned. Comrade Major, you're mistaken. The little people just decided to take a little break. John sipped his whiskey, the Major his beer, and I listened to their conversation. We were sitting in the bar of the officer's house, which had been built by our own hands and was about to be opened. There were no bartenders yet, so the officers brought their own drinks. You call them little people? Sometimes. They're not like elves. Sometimes it seems like the little bastards are carrying around magic dust or something, especially when they pop up where you don't expect them. Connors and Banjo came into the bar. Connor's shirt was clinging to his sweaty skin, sweat streaming down his face. Banjo seemed dry by comparison. Bartender. Connors yelled. Beer. Pour me a beer. There's no bartender here, Banjo reminded him. I know, I'm just practicing. Connors looked around and nodded to the new Major. Good evening, sir. Good evening, Mr. Connors. I've recently learned that you're the instructor pilot for our company. Yeah. That's right. I'm an ace helicopter pilot. I suggest you stay away from him when he harnesses the car, Banjo added. Shut up, Banjo. Did you teach at the flight school? Astor asked Connors. I haven't had to yet. But I think that's where they'll send me after this mess. Why? Are you an instructor pilot too? No, Astor answered. I just graduated. I was very impressed with the training program at Rucker. They train some of the best helicopter pilots in the entire army. Once you graduate, you can almost consider yourself safe. Almost safe. Astor laughed. That's right. Rookie pilots are in danger every step of the way. They know just enough to get into trouble. As far as I'm concerned, they're safest when they've flown about 500 hours and understand how the machine works. If you've survived 1,000 hours of flying, you've learned everything right. And that's if you fly behind the lines. Here you learn things a lot faster, or you get shot. Connors clutched the beer Banjo had set before him. Wow, I thought this was a great program, Astor said. I've flown here for a while now, and I'm impressed with your training. Yeah, we're okay, but don't judge the whole place by what you see now. When you start flying into tight landing zones in formation and getting your ass shot by the Viet Cong, things will be different. Anyway, if you fly like you've been trained and don't panic, I'm cool, Astor replied. Well, either way, you know best. Connors turned to Hall and me and rolled his eyes. To the Army Air Corps. Astor raised his glass. Connors didn't understand. I left the club and went to compose my daily letter home, mentally calculating my flight time. By Connors's system, I was just above being completely safe with my 700 hours. Connors himself had almost 3,000 hours, almost all of them spent in the Huey. Once again, I was convinced I was becoming a professional helicopter pilot. When I get home, I can start my own helicopter company. All I had to do was get home. A little later that night, I heard the piercing screams of a man yelling like a madman. I jumped out of the tent, covered in goosebumps. Damn them. God damn them. The voice was shrieking. Near the officer's house I noticed 4 soldiers dragging one of the pilots, who was wriggling, kicking and squealing. It was Captain Fontaine. Fontaine hated Owens and White. "I'll take them down. I'll take them down. Calm down. I'll take them down." Fontaine's voice broke into a thin squeak. He resembled a recalcitrant pig being dragged to the slaughter, but 4 soldiers, including Connors, held him tight and eventually dragged the twisted captain up the short steps to his room. Strange, Fontaine had always been a quiet guy. "He's out of his mind," Connors reported. "We can see that." "Why?" I asked, back in the tent, watching Banjo boiling water for coffee by his bunk. "Fucking Owens and White." Connors sat down on the bunk. Fontaine told him what he'd discovered about how those 2 were putting in fake raid hours for themselves. They had a bunch of combat hours piled up, even though everyone knew they'd never once taken to the skies. Anyway, Fontaine confronted Owens. Owens replied like, "Don't get jealous, he's an asshole. Thinks he's surrounded by bastards like him. Why would they even want a raid? Did you ever think Owens was going for the majors? He needs his combat hours. Might even be able to snag a medal or 2. Coffee break. "Sorry, boys, it's all on me," Banjo laughed. "You should have kept your mouth shut." "I can't. It makes me feel better to think I'm living a better life than you guys." Banjo kept laughing. "A cookie? You're so generous, Mr. Bates." "Not at all, Mr. Connors." Banjo bowed and smiled. "Mason?" "Nah, thanks. I'm going to bed." When the mosquito net was pulled down over the bed, there was a sense of privacy, even in the middle of a crowded tent. You're in full view of everyone, but in your own private space. I ducked under the tent and fell asleep. Darkness surrounded me, and something formless swarmed after me in pursuit. Something dived into my consciousness and overwhelmed my heart with overwhelming fear. I jerked sharply and rose up on my elbows, waking up. Through the netting, I spotted Connors peering out the other side of the tent. I tried to remember what had scared me so much, but I couldn't. The camp was quiet. I leaned back powerlessly and stared up at the mosquito net ceiling. The next day, Gary and I were assigned to Major Astor's platoon, who was conducting his first sortie as commander. It took most of the day to distribute dry rations to the squads that were combing the bush for Charlies. So far, no sign of Charlie. Occasional sniper hits were reported. Old campsites, new campsites, even a couple prisoners. But essentially all the jungle and bush we prowled through was deserted. Astor had acted extremely intelligently at the beginning of the sortie. He had distributed all 8 helicopters he had been assigned to separate delivery zones. This allowed the process to be expedited. Delivering supplies was considered a tedious job for pilots, but Gary and I saw the charm in these boring sorties and had a lot of fun while doing it. Nothing malicious, no raids on the military police, just a simple test of skills. For example, you had to use the blade to make a notch on a branch, while landing in the landing zone, flying as close to the tree as possible. Back home in the States, such behavior might have been considered idiotic. Here, it could have saved your life. That day I was experimenting with tightening the Huey. When the Huey tilted the nose too much on takeoff, the air resistance against the flat roof forced the helicopter's nose even lower. As a result, the machine would begin to dive toward the ground as it accelerated. If this happened right above the ground, you were in a vicious circle. Pulling the control stick was useless. The roof couldn't overcome the air resistance. If you added gas to get off the ground, you would crash at a higher speed, because the engine would get more power. If you just sit there and swear, you'll crash at low speed. Either way, you lose. I almost got sucked into a dive like that once, and I wanted to figure out how far down the nose needed to go to get caught. I decided to find out by simulating a takeoff from a high platform. I put the nose down hard and added enough pitch to make the machine go horizontal above the ground. I jerked the control stick, but the helicopter didn't react in any way. I realized I was being sucked in. Adding more power would make things worse. Having been in a dangerous trap and feeling how easy it was to fall into it, I was convinced that I would never fall into it by accident. I conducted my experiment flying over the valley, so all I had to do to get out of the snare was to swoop down to the ground. Toward the end of the day, the Charlies decided to mow down a couple of our platoons before dark. We were in the field command post waiting to load the vehicles when the pawn commander called Asta into the staff tent. There were 6 Hueys in the parking lot. A few minutes later, Asta signaled for the engines to start and walked over to Gary and me. One platoon was ambushed a couple kilometers from here. We'll only need 5 vehicles to get them out. Asta zipped up his body armor. Stay here and be ready in case I decide to call you in. He quickly walked toward his helicopter, which was already started up. Dangerous task, Gary commented. We both climbed into the cockpit. Gary started the engine so he could listen to the communications channel without draining the battery. Neither of us wanted to experiment with finding a second battery for a light in the middle of the jungle. I turned on the comms. Charlie 1-6, Pastor Yellow 1 Asta said. No response. Roger, Charlie 1-6. We're on our way. Throw in some smoke. No response. Being on the ground, all we could hear was Asta talking. He seemed to know what he was doing. Yellow 1, they're sitting behind the tree line, came John Hall's voice. Negative, Yellow 4. I see smoke, Asta replied. I started to buckle my harness. If they're ready to pick up the soldiers now, we should be flying out in a few minutes. Negative, Yellow 1. The target is downwind of the smoke, Hall insisted. Yellow 4. I'm in command here, Asta said. Got it. Got it. Do you think it's time for us to go up? Gary asked. Nope, not yet. We're waiting for Asta's command. Yellow 4 is taking heavy fire from the trees, yelled Hall. Asta, probably already on the ground, didn't respond. Yellow 1, we're leaving. My flight mechanic's wounded. We heard machine guns crackling from Hall's chopper while he was reporting on the comms. I think we should go, I said. Yeah, Gary revved up and took off quickly. Yellow 1, Charlie 1-6. I see you. You're about 500 meters to leeward of us. It was clear to Gary and me that Asta had blown it. He had landed to leeward of the Grunt's safe position, following the smoke blown away and not listening to Hall, who had seen the right position. I saw the squad and reported to Asta over the comms that we were joining them. He responded with a short roger that we joined the squad and sat quietly near the Grunt's position. As the crews mingled amongst themselves, returning from their task in the Gulf area, Asta separated himself from the crowd and quickly strode away. That guy's trouble, I said. He's a walking disaster. Hey, Major Disaster, Gary shouted. Everybody laughed. The nickname stuck. Hall was waiting for us in the tent. His flight mechanic Collins had been killed. The car had taken over 20 bullets. Hall was shaking with rage. Outside the zone, he was right. And catastrophe let his words pass his ears. I'll kill him, Hall said. I know what that feels like, I began. No, I'm really going to kill him. I'm going to shoot him, okay? Hall unholstered his revolver and headed toward the catastrophe tent. I thought he was playing to an audience, but 15 minutes later, as I stood in line for dinner, I heard Catastrophe screaming for help from his tent. Hall stood silent, stretched out to his full height, holding a revolver cocked in one hand and a can of beer in the other. He had taken up a position halfway between the Catastrophe tent and our mess tent. About 30 soldiers were watching with interest, waiting for supper. Hall, if you don't put your gun down right now, I'll court-martial you, came a voice from behind the tent door. Sooner or later you'll have to get out, Major. You're crazy. You can't point a gun at a superior officer and lock him in his own barracks. You'll be in serious trouble if you don't put that gun down now. Now. You killed Collins, Major. Now it's your turn. Hall raised his revolver and took aim. Hope. Catastrophe squealed as he saw Williams heading toward the mess hall. Williams looked up and saw Hall in the thickening dusk. Catastrophe looked outside hopefully, then yelled again. "Help! Major Williams, get that crazy man away." Williams nodded and rinsed his cutlery before walking into the dining room. No one came to Catastrophe's aid. Every now and then we heard his cries for help. They were no longer paid attention to. Later that night, Hall lifted the siege. I could hear him singing incoherently on the path outside my tent. The next morning he woke up so drunk he wasn't allowed to fly. That incident set off a whole series of conflicts between all of us, and the accumulated tension did its work. One night Hall beat up Daisy and split his lip. He continued to harass Catastrophe, throwing Montagnard spears at him as he walked around the camp. Shortly after a screaming Captain Fontaine was hauled off to his tent, Riker bluntly advised Shaker to fuck off in response to orders to go build the officer's house. Connors and Nate fought over where the laundry should be dried. Nate and Kaiser did not share a common territory. The farewell party in Williams' honor went very quietly. The major, an excellent air commander, had received a transfer to the brigade from Saigon, went for promotion. The restraint of the party was due to the fact that Williams never socialized with the US closely as Fields did. The next day, after the awards ceremony at which we received our aviation medals, our new commander, Major Crane, gave a welcoming speech. "I think there is nothing wrong with discipline, except for the neatness of the personnel," Crane said. "This company boasts an impressive list of accomplishments in the cavalry. I suppose you've been so busy that you've let yourselves get a little loose." He wore a crisp field uniform and shined boots. Even Williams, a pedant to the core, didn't pay attention to such nonsense. Williams was concentrating on our combat missions. Crane went off on a tangent about the useless. "Even if you don't think it's necessary to wear a shirt in a company location, a tucked-in shirt, I might add I have a different opinion. Yes, it's hard for everyone here. This is war. But if we miss even one aspect of our professional behavior, it will instantly affect our effectiveness." He paused and smiled. "Like, look, I'm just a regular guy who's good at his job, so from now on we will follow the statutory rules of uniform dress. This includes tucked-in shirts, loose-fitting field pants, and clean uniforms." It's our own fault, I thought. We've spent so much time trying to make our camp look nice that this guy thinks he's back at Fort Benning. "Speaking of personal hygiene, I have some good news for you," he smiled. "Starting tomorrow, we're going to start digging our own well to put a shower in here." He waited a few seconds. I think he was hoping for a shout of approval. We were silent. "Captain Sherman has been appointed project manager, and I expect your full cooperation." "At ease." "What's gotten into my fucking head?" Connors complained in the tent. "I'm kind of used to washing my own way." "Fucking hell. How do you wash yourself?" Banjo asked. "Same as everybody else. I drag the mold around until it turns into a second skin. Then I tear it off, and the crap comes off with it." "Actually, we could use a shower," Gary said. "I agree. I wonder how deep we'll have to dig," I asked. "Maybe all the way to Cincinnati." Gary joked. Farris came into the tent. "Boys, I have another announcement to make." He waited for us to gather around him. "We need volunteers to transfer to other air units to supplement our personnel." "A transfer from the cavalry?" Gary asked. "That's right." When?" someone asked. "From now until the end of next month." This was my chance. Maybe I could get a non-dusty position in Quinion, driving councillors around or something. I raised my hand. For the next few days I flew routine errands around the nearby zones or digging a well. Filling and eyeing the buckets as they were pulled upward on a rope, I daydreamed about my new position. A fellow flight school mate had recently written me that he had been assigned to a naval aircraft carrier and given a personal Huey. I knew there were tons of decent jobs outside the cavalry. For example, a courier helicopter pilot in Saigon rationed hours from 9 in the morning to 5 in the evening. Just imagine, no more mud, no more tents, and no more jungle. At a depth of 25 feet, we came across a rock formation. Sherman consulted with the sappers and they said we should blast. On our way to Happy Valley, Gary and I caught the Bob Hope show. While we were busy hauling ass and junk that afternoon, we managed to overhear some of the most delirious communications conversations I've ever heard. Raven 6, Delta 1. We have a visual on the target. Delta 1 was a military helicopter. Roger, Delta 1. See anything on their backs? Negative. All right, it's a matter of luck. Go ahead, take M down. Copy that. What the hell are they talking about? Gary asked. We had just picked up the empty food containers and were floating smoothly over the mountainside. I don't get it, I said. Crow 6, our bullets won't bring them down. Did you try headshots? Yeah, fire rockets. Copy that. Quiet. Gary was approaching the parking lot of the highway patrol we were supposed to deliver supplies to. Raven 6, Delta 1. It worked. Both ready. That's good, Delta 1. I was beginning to think we couldn't stop the elephant. Elephant. Are we killing fucking elephants? Copy that. Any other instructions? Sure thing, Delta 1. Go down and get the tusks. It's annoying, Gary said. Killing an elephant was like shooting your own grandmother. There was general outrage in the company when it was learned that the ivory had been delivered to the division base. It was okay to kill people in war, but why touch innocent creatures like elephants? Anyone who does that might as well come to your house and shoot your dog, Decker said. Get the camera, Mason. Sherman yelled. What's going on? We're blowing up the well. Get the camera. I got behind the well line and aimed the lens. Everybody ready? Sherman yelled. Ready. Ready. Boom. A cloud of dust hovered 5 feet above the ground. I clicked the shutter. Oh, shit. I thought it was going to go boom, Sherman yelled. Yeah. Was there even an explosion? You got any water? Everybody's leaning over the well. Hooray, motherfucker, Connors said. There's more earth under the rocks. Let's keep digging, Sherman announced. Someone had painted a 5 by 10 foot picture of the X-ray zone on the wall. I walked around with a glass of bourbon diluted with water in my hand. The furniture, shipped in from the States, looked foreign. The chairs were made of stained bamboo, with tropical patterns on the seats. The tables had bamboo legs. The place had been furnished for the grand opening. We all knew that the colonel was going to bring the nurses for the occasion. He hadn't arrived yet. About 100 guys were passing the time sipping drinks for 25 cents. Practically the whole company was gathered there. Nate was having a serious conversation with Kaiser near the bar and tapping his hand to the rhythm of a song playing over the new stereo. Connors and Banjo were having fun at a neighboring table. Farris was drinking 7-Up, but still smiling. Hall was sitting in the corner looking at a wall painting. Catastrophe was discussing business with Crane, completely blocking out the interlocutor. Wendell and Barber were examining a working tape recorder. Ressler was savouring his second beer with childish delight. Riker had drunk more than usual and was flushed. I stood at the bar and wondered if I'd gotten the clap in Taipei. You're not sick? I said then, pointing to her crotch. Nothing like that? Her face took on a pained expression. Me? Don't be silly. I'm not sick. What I certainly can't afford is the trip pack, I explained. Look, she panted. I'm practically a virgin. I noticed the silence, and at the same moment Ressler shoved me in the side. Bob, he whispered. The sisters are here. The colonel arrived quietly, came in the back door, and brought the promised nurses. I bet they didn't even realize they were the main inspiration for the construction of the officer's home. It was obvious that they felt terribly awkward. Everyone in the room watched quietly and intently as the 4 women of honourable age and rank were seated at the colonel's table. How could one not get nervous? The music continued to play. 2 extremely plump lieutenants entered the room. I looked at the door, waiting for the others. That was it. We realized it after a long minute. Conversations resumed. There must be real nurses in this fucking division, Connors growled. Banjo was crying with laughter. "There are nurses over there," Ressler said. "You know what I mean," Connors said. "Nurses, you know. The ones with their tits sticking out here," he pointed with his hands, "not hanging out here." "Hell, my grandmother looks hotter." The colonel looked around while his aides talked to the nurses. "Ladies," the drunken warrant officer raced over to the table and bowed politely to the nurses. "Gentlemen," he nodded to the adjutants. So he bowed again. The colonel stared at him fiercely. The nurses laughed. As the guy turned to leave, the colonel relaxed. As silence hung in the hall and all eyes were fixed on the stage, the drunkard let out his gasps with a deafening crackle. The colonel, his adjutants and nurses all flinched at this report. The colonel turned black and began to rise from his chair, probably to nail the drunkard. But the hall came to life again, thus stopping the colonel halfway. We laughed. By letting out his gases, the drunkard had expressed our common opinion, and the colonel understood it. He sank helplessly into a chair. The nurses informed him that it was time for them to go back as soon as possible. Farris pronounced, "Gentlemen, I insist that you finish your drinks and go to your tents. We have an important flight tomorrow." It wasn't so much an important flight as a long one. Every day since I got back from vacation, we'd go to the mountains 40 or 50 miles from Nkei. We'd get up at 5 in the morning, pick up grunts in the Gulf area or at the fuel station, drive them into the mountains, drop them off at various areas, and pick up the wounded and dead from units that had long been stuck in the jungle. In the mountainous terrain, the pilots felt at ease. We weren't getting killed. The grunts held off the enemy onslaught, but suffered constant losses from sniper fire and insidious booby traps. During a week of such transportation, the floor and partitions of the cargo compartment got dirty. The blood that had dried under the seats had dried solidly, and there were all sorts of pieces of flesh hanging from the metal parts. When the smell of human remains became unbearable, the pilots usually flew over the bridge that led to Nkei and landed in the river. Washing Hueys spawned a new service industry among the Vietnamese population around Nkei. As we flew over the bridge, local boys ready to work would race to the shallow water near the sandbar where we usually landed. Our main concern was not getting the electronics wet. All other parts of the car up to the floor level of the cargo area were not afraid of water. I hovered over the shallow water, keeping the skids underwater, looking for a spot with the right depth. All I had to do was keep an eye on the tail rotor to make sure I didn't dive too deep. As soon as we turned off the engine, the boys would grab buckets and brushes and start scraping the car. The flight mechanic usually took the seats off to be scrubbed from all sides. I took off my boots and socks, put them on top of the dashboard, rolled up my pants and waded to the shore. I stood on the sandbar and watched. The flight mechanic supervised the process, and the boys did all the work. They even climbed on the roof and poured water through the hellhole, which was extremely efficient on their part, but not necessary at all. Other forms of business flourished on the sandspit. They sold Coca-Cola. There were also mermaids. The Coke girls had their own work areas. The girl who worked in the zone where I usually landed was called Long. I often flew to the sandspit, so she knew me well. Long was about 10 years old and wore her black hair down to her waist. She had black eyes and dark skin, darker than most Vietnamese. She was a pretty and cheerful little girl. "Do you have a wife?" she asked me when we first met. I answered in the affirmative. "Is she tall like you?" "No, she's about my chin." "Oh, very tall. Does she grow hair on her arms like you?" "Not like me. Like you, I stroked the fuzz on her arm." "Oh, that's nice." She laughed. She'd never met a white woman before. Over the next few months, she and I became friends. Usually Long would sit beside me on the sandbar while the Huey was being washed and talk about how she wished the war would end. She believed the war would be over very soon. There were already rumors that peace talks were about to begin. She couldn't understand how the Viet Cong fought the soldiers who marched through the sky dot when a clean helicopter was rinsed off. The flight mechanic usually left it to dry. He would then undress for a quick swim. Such healthy exercise was provoked by older girls who pretended to be mermaids and beckoned affectionately to them. sitting on islets downstream. The mermaids appeared on the river the day after the general banned camping in Ankara due to increased rates of socially significant diseases. For months, while a special brothel area for the US Army was being built on the outskirts of town, the mermaid business flourished. I had never been down the river myself, but the mermaids were indeed tempting. After a while, the helicopter would dry out completely and the smiling flight mechanic would return to the car. Long was getting up to say goodbye. Standing to her full height, she was only a couple inches taller than me sitting there. "Bye, Bob. Be well." She smiled and ran off to sell her wares to the pilots of other Hueys that landed nearby. During my flights to the sandbar, I often tried to teach the flight mechanic the basics of piloting, so that he could take over if the pilot was injured and land the machine on the ground in one piece. The results of such lessons frustrated me greatly because we were always short of time. As a consequence, I never once met a flight mechanic who could perform even a rudimentary landing approach. What seemed to me an extremely primitive human skill bypassed even the most intelligent flight mechanics. Of all my students, Reacher was the only one to make significant progress. I had flown so many hours with him that he had practically learned to hover, and I was sure that in an emergency he would be able to land the machine on the ground, if not in one piece, then at least in two pieces. Rumours began to circulate that things were getting hot again at Yadrang. While the 1st Battalion, 9th Cavalry Regiment was sniffing around, we continued to haul ass and junk around the base. These sorties were getting tiresome for the pilots, and the helicopters were beginning to suffer from exhaustion and mechanical failure. Less than 50% of the machines were airworthy. On the same day that one of the Chinooks was hit, 4 Hueys in our company broke down at once, simply because of careless piloting. Another -4 Hueys was the reaction to the news of the 4 breakdowns. We were apathetic. One night I was sent out on a flight with a rookie Captain Hertz. Nate was flying with another rookie, and we were to fly to Quinion and back to give them a checkup. As the orange sun shone dimly in our backs, we flew over an key pass, heading east. Hertz had been flying the car since takeoff. He'd been following right behind Nate and doing pretty well. We didn't talk much in the air. All he told me was that he'd flown a bunch of hours in the States. The other day, a collision while flying in formation killed 10 cavalrymen. We've been hearing from all over the country about similar crashes. Formation flying skills in night conditions were critical. The slightest misstep by one man could kill a whole bunch of men. All it took was a clash of blades. As it started to get dark, Hertz began to fall behind Nate. I forced him to stay as close as possible, because too much behind made it hard to see the situation from the head chopper's point of view. Stay right behind him like you're flying during the day. Hertz moved closer to Nate to a distance of 2 diameters of the main rotor. As it happened, he began to sway, moving farther away, then closer. He tried to stop the swaying, but he was acting too sharply. I remained silent. During the next swing toward Nate, he freaked out and flew farther away. "We have to stay close," I explained. "If we flew in a normal formation, we'd be setting everyone up. If Nate decided to turn left now, we'd know it when we were right on top of him." I just backed up. "It's safer that way." "I understand. But trust me, it's safer to stay close." "Okay." As he pulled himself back up to Nate, he started to sway again. It was like he was sitting on a pendulum that swung him away from Nate and back again. Either he knew some secret helicopter trick, or we were about to get bladed by Nate. At the very last moment, when I realized there would be no secret moves, I grabbed the controls. Take and I leveled back sharply and got back into position. "What's the matter?" "You almost hit Nate." "It wasn't even close," Hertz countered. "Close enough to take control." "I don't think so." "We're out here in the dark for your sake, not mine. Try it again." He took the controls and started rocking back and forth again. In my opinion, he was overly fearful of a collision, which was reasonable, but it prevented him from assessing the situation correctly. He continued to jerk violently, compounding the initial mistake until things got completely out of control. As we were swung backwards, I inquired, "Is everyone all right?" Yes, Hertz said. The pendulum swung toward Nate, and I had to take control again. I did. It pissed him off. No one's ever taken the controls from me before, especially not a warrant officer. Wow, we got a snob here who hates worthies. Look, Captain, I think you should thank me for saving your life. I need these evening flights as much as I need a second hole in my ass. When we get back, I'll report you for insubordination. All right then. We're going to turn around now. Nate's going to tail us on the way back. Take the controls and drive west. Roger that. Hertz took the controls. We didn't say a word on the way to the golf course. I seriously considered going into a deep roll where I could unbuckle my harness, open the door, and throw the bastard out. But I didn't have that option. Hertz made a flawless landing approach to the Gulf area. Truth be told, his only mistake was rocking while flying in formation. I would have helped him deal with it if he had behaved more calmly. Once on the ground, he jumped out and furiously staggered away. I opened the flight log and listed myself as the crew commander and hers as the pilot. How'd it go? Gary asked as I plopped my bag on the bunk. Ozzy. That new guy, Hertz, tried to kill me and Nate, and when I had to take over, he went ballistic. Yeah, I just heard him yelling at Faris. What'd he say? What'd he say? I wasn't really listening, but he definitely mentioned your name. Nate came inside with a smirk. Mason, the new captain's pretty pissed at you. I know. He promised me an insubordination report. At least I'll get to go home early. Keep your pocket wide open. Nate sat on my bunk. Faris ended up giving him a beating. Did he? What'd he say? He said that no matter what rank you were a crew chief. He also said if Mason thought you were flying too close, you were flying too close. Really? Uh-huh. Nate drove a plastic chess piece across the board. Also, Hertz is going to have to apologize to you. I'm in a really good mood. Shall we play? Nate took 2 pawns. Easy, I said.